how we can continue the discussion. Yes, so this session is recorded, and if you don't want to share your camera, please keep that disconnected. During the presentation, there will be times at the end of the speaker event where we are going to open up the microphones for questions. As I was saying before, you know, it's been a monthly event for the last 5 months that was organized with Dr. Sarabhai and myself. We usually have use the same kind of agenda for each of these events. We'll have some introductions at the beginning. We'll talk about some news and then there'll be a presentation from Dr. Stewart on how the climate change affects our health, which I hope everybody will find interesting. And at the end of that presentation, we'll take questions on the topic of discussions. And then we'll move to the action and choice corner, where we'll talk about some actions that can benefit both your individual health, but also the health of the environment in particular. And then, you know, we will open the microphones again for discussions at the end of the meeting. And there'll be some questions I have for you on your feedback, hopefully. Let's start with the introductions. This is Agostino Schito. I'm one of the climate reality leader, originally from Italy. I have been living now in Ellicott City for quite a while. And I joined the Climate Reality Project in 2019 and trained to become a climate reality leader in 2019. Let me then move to Dr. Frances Stewart. Maybe Frances, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm a physician living in Bethesda. I'm a retired U.S. Navy captain. I'm involved in several climate organizations, including being the chapter chair for the Climate Reality chapter in Montgomery County, and a member of the steering committee for Climate Exchange Maryland. Also work with Elders Climate Action and Citizens Climate Lobby, and some groups that are not focused on climate, the American Red Cross and Maryland Medical Reserve Corps.
And since we talked about the Climate Reality Project, here is a very short presentation on what this organization is, founded in 2006 by former US Vice President Al Gore. The mission is to engage a discussion at a global level and to find solutions to the climate crisis. We do this by empowering people to become activists, to participate in the conversations. And this is a global organization that has more than 20,000 climate reality leaders in over 150 countries, of which, you know, both Dr. Stewart and myself are part of it. So then let's go on with our presentation today. On the news and clues, we have shared a lot of information in the past. So I wanted to update our discussion here with what's going on the available solutions and some of the positive trends that we see in the current view and for the next year. First, these are all news from 2021, right? So it's a recent new information. The Empire State Building and its related buildings are now powered by wind. What that tells us is that these type of solution is readily available now, and it's affordable. So businesses are part of the solution and are working on it. Another one of the things that happened this past year, the Keystone XL pipeline project was closed, definitely closed after years and years of discussions, up and down, yes or no. The company that was behind the project has announced in June that this project will be terminated. And this is important to us and to the global situation in general, because you know, we are working towards a future where energy is provided by renewable. And the XL pipeline was going to, you know, increase the production and the use of fuel. Even the tar, you know, sand type of oil, which is one of the worst, like it produced very intensive, very bad for the environment. So I think that the closure of this project was good news for the United States and globally for all. Renewable energy in the US has quadrupled in the past decade. So this is what we discussed in one of our meetings, exponential growth on the renewable, especially from wind, but of course also from solar. And then as we can see in the 2022, really solar and wind, the renewable will become prevalent in the new energy generation. We have seen the data in the past presentations, but there are many, many other companies that have joined now this type of trend, and they're taking advantage of these renewable energy that is good for all of us. And in fact, if this trend is confirmed, this will put the United States on track to meet the goal of having a carbon neutral energy sector by 2035, which is the goal that our administration has set for the United States. So good news on that point too. If you want to know more about good news, I'm going to send you to a couple of pages that you can find, websites. One is from the World Wildlife Organization. There are a lot of information you can find in general on climate change and specifically on what is the positive outcome as they see. Also, another good site that I use a lot for my own learning and news is about the Yale Climate Connections. And during Thanksgiving, they have published some very good stories about what happened in 2021 that can set some sort of optimism in the outlook for this next year and the future. So this is all about the news that I have. And since we have a very important and large presentation from Dr. Stewart, I didn't want to take a lot of time out. So let's skip the questions, and Francis, if you're ready, I will stop my sharing and you can start on your side.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you about this topic this evening. And let's see. Okay. Technology is wonderful, except when it doesn't work the way that you want it to.
We can see your screen. You can
go. You can see the screen? Okay,
great. Yeah, if you go to presentation mode, then we'll see it in a larger.
Okay. So
fantastic, perfect.
There are many things we could talk about with climate, but I want to talk to you all specifically tonight about climate and health. I'm a physician, and as a physician, I know that climate change is one of the greatest threats to our health. I want to help you to see the vital connections between climate, air quality, and health, and empower you to help improve the health of your community, and also improve your own health and work to improve our climate for everyone. Now, this little video gives you something of an idea of what's been happening from 1880, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, up to now. This is from the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center nearby in Greenbelt. It's made in 2018, which is the fourth hottest year on record. The Earth has been warming up for decades. This is not a new problem. And you can see the last 5 years are the hottest 5 years on record. That's still true, even though this was made in 2018. And the last 4 years were all more than 1 degree Celsius warmer than the 19th century average. You may have heard that we need to keep warming below 2 degrees, so we're almost halfway there. A warmer climate contributes to melting polar ice caps and glaciers, to rising sea levels, to severe droughts, to longer fire seasons. That was done in 2018. But if NASA updated it for 2022, it would be equally true. The data for 2021 is still a little bit provisional. There's a little number crunching still to be done, but it looks like 2021 was the second hottest year on record. And again, those 5 years, last 5 years have been the 5 hottest years. Now, what causes all this? There's a strong scientific consensus that this is human caused. Every National Academy of Science in the world agrees on that. And if you look at the scientific papers on that, 13,950 peer-reviewed scientific articles that were published agreed on that. Now, there wasn't a disagreement, 24 papers, not much compared to almost 14,000. The consensus, though, goes way beyond science. Being a retired naval officer, I pay some attention to what the Department of Defense says. And the Department of Defense, as early as 2014, in the Quadrennial Defense Review, noted the serious problems we face with climate change. In military speak, climate change is a threat multiplier. Whatever problems we're facing, climate change makes them worse. We've also heard from US mayors, from many, many businesses, and also from Pope Francis and other other faith leaders. There's much that we could say about all of these areas, from defense through faith, and perhaps we will in future presentations. But for now, let's look at what most Americans are thinking. This again is from 2018. You can see that awareness of weather changes has been going up. Personal concern is staying pretty steady, maybe going up a little. It varies some with where you are in the political spectrum, but even Republicans, who are the least likely to be concerned, more than half are personally concerned. One interesting thing is we tend to think that other people are less concerned than we are, which may make us more reluctant to talk to them about what we can do together. Now, this is something that has become much more an issue among healthcare professionals and public health professionals. As Dr. Salas says in this quote, climate change is a medical emergency. And professional organizations have been much, much more involved in talking about this, talking to their patients, talking to policymakers. And you can see a sampling. This is from 2017, some of the medical and public health organizations involved in this. And these numbers are continuing to grow with more and more organizations becoming involved because of more and more concern about what's happening to our patients and the communities we serve. But it's not just professionals worried about this. Americans overall are concerned about pollution's impact on our health, and they're starting to see the connections between health and climate solutions. Worries about what's happening to one's family, noticing the impact of longer and more severe allergy seasons. Also the realization that clean air is a personal right that everyone should have, and that health could be improved if the United States took steps to prevent climate change, or at least to reduce it. Now, there are effects of climate change on just about anything you can think about. We could talk for hours about that, but since we don't have hours right now, let's focus on the health impacts, which are extremely important. The health impacts are many and varied. They're particularly severe for vulnerable populations, but they potentially affect all of us in many different ways. And we'll talk more about some of these different effects. These vulnerable populations include low-income communities, communities of color, children, the elderly, people with chronic medical conditions, pregnant women, and people with limited language proficiency. Limited language proficiency? A lot of the effects of climate change cause serious emergencies that one needs to take immediate action for. If you can't understand what you hear on the radio, what you hear on the television, you're going to be more at risk. And these things are going to exacerbate the inequalities we're already facing. Now, these things are happening globally, but I also want to take a bit of a look at what's happening here in Maryland. Maryland is heating up. If you look at these stripes, the redder the stripe, the hotter it's getting, starting in 1895 up to 2018. You go up to 2021, the last year we have data for, it's getting hotter, and there's really no reason to think that 2022 won't continue that trend. Now, this is an even more serious trend in places that are already hotter. The southern United States, certainly, but also places in the tropics. Some are at risk of becoming completely unlivable. Even now in the United States, we have over 600 deaths a year from heat. We tend to think of things like hurricanes as being tremendous dangers, but hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and lightning put together cause fewer deaths in the United States than extreme heat. Each heat wave increases early death. And there are bad things that happen to people that don't necessarily kill them. Like, one of the things we know about heat waves is that during a heat wave, more babies will be born prematurely. And being born prematurely sets a baby up for a number of other problems. But it's not just heat. We know that extreme precipitation events are increasing. That extreme precipitation, times that we have lots and lots of rain, or perhaps the lovely wintry mix, or snow. This is data from NOAA and the University of Maryland, looking at the northeastern United States from 1910 up to 2014. And although it goes up and down from year to year, weather does change a lot from year to year, you see a definite upward trend in this. It's a trend that's continuing. Now, you don't necessarily need a NOAA graph to see this. Many of you are very familiar with Ellicott City and what happened in Ellicott City. That was the second 1,000-year flood in Ellicott City in 2 years. Now, flooding in Ellicott City isn't just from climate change. There have been floods in Ellicott City in the 19th century, but they're becoming more common and more severe, and climate change plays a major role in that. Now, fortunately for us here in Maryland, as bad as the floods in Ellicott City were, it was a relatively small area. And there were people from other parts of Maryland, from other states, who could come in and help with the rescue. There was resources to help with the rebuilding. But there are weather events that are much larger than that may cost billions of dollars to rebuild. This again is data from NOAA, starting back in 1980, going up to 2017, looking at different types of weather events that cost $1 billion or more in damages. And you can see that there were relatively few back in the 1980s, 3 here, 1 here, 3 there. Looking at the 2000s, 2017, we had 17. These are huge events that cause a great deal of problems economically, but even more problems in human lives and suffering. A good example of this is Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and cut off the electricity for 100% of the island. 2 months later, only half of those people had power. There were problems with access to clean water and to food. The official death toll was 64 people who died directly from the storm. But if you looked at people who died from the effects of the storm, there were over 4,600 people who died. Many of those people had difficulty with accessing clean water, food. Their medications frequently were lost in the storm. They're difficult to replace. Their usual source of healthcare may have been damaged or destroyed. People who needed things like dialysis found it difficult or impossible to access. Even outside the island, it affected healthcare. 8% of the medicines we consume in the United States are manufactured in Puerto Rico. It was a huge problem in that was intravenous fluids. If you've ever spent time in the emergency room or been an inpatient in a hospital, you know how important those intravenous fluids are. Now, when we have a event like a hurricane or a major flood, waterborne disease is a serious hazard. Waterborne diseases are diseases that people contract because they're exposed to either toxins or pathogens like bacteria and viruses in water. That could be recreational water, the water that we swim or fish in, or it could be drinking water. And these are becoming more and more common problems. When I was in medical school, we thought about this in terms of places that didn't have their act together for proper sanitation, but it's become a hazard in many, many parts of the United States as we deal with these climate issues. Now, the flip side of the flooding are droughts. We have more water falling in some places, less in others. Overall, in the United States, we're seeing much more drought in the Western US and more excessive precipitation and flooding in the Eastern United States. And there are serious problems that affect health from those droughts. One are the dust storms. Dust storms really make any respiratory illness worse. They also can spread respiratory infections. When I was first in the Navy, I was stationed in San Diego in Southern California. And one of the things I learned about there was valley fever, something I never heard about in medical school. It's a fungal infection that you see in very dry conditions, difficult to diagnose, difficult to treat, and sometimes very serious. Hadn't thought about valley fever much since I left San Diego over 30 years ago, but valley fever is starting to spread way out of that area as more and more areas are affected by drought. So physicians in many places are needing to learn about a disease that they had never heard of or just saw as a footnote in a text years ago. Drought can also increase the concentration of toxic chemicals in water, so another way we can get waterborne illness. And they can contribute to the outbreak of toxic algae. Those toxic algae produce chemicals that can harm our nervous system, our liver, and our kidneys. Now, we also have problems with vector-borne disease. What the heck is a vector? A vector, at least in this sense, is an insect that can carry disease, generally mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas. And diseases from mosquito, tick, and flea bites have more than tripled in the US in recent years. And climate change is a big piece of that. These are generally insects that live in a certain temperature range. Usually a warmer range is preferred. Things get warmer, they expand their range. They generally reproduce in warm weather. So the more warm weather days you have, the more days that they're going to be laying eggs. They also are going to be doing it faster and faster as they speed up in this warm weather, and the actual incubation of those eggs becomes faster. So you get more and more insects. Also, they have an increased metabolism. Now, these mosquitoes and ticks and fleas bite you not to annoy you, although they do a great job of that. They bite you to feed. So the faster their metabolism is, the more they need to feed, the more they bite. So we're seeing more and more of diseases like Zika, West Nile virus, and other mosquito and vector-borne diseases. One that's particularly prevalent in this part of the world is Lyme disease. Lyme disease is now found in ticks in over half of all US counties. And you can see that the rate of Lyme disease is going up and up. That's a real concern for people who live in areas with Lyme disease. You know, if they're out in a natural area or even in kind of scrubby areas in their yard, that can be a real problem. And doing the whole tick inspection is a pain, and you don't always find them all. Now, another area that really affects health is food and nutrition. One thing that's true about all of us is we need to eat, and we need to eat foods that provide all the nutritional requirements that we need. But if you look at the food crops we grow, every crop has an optimal range of temperature and an optimal amount of water during its life cycle to grow well. So if you look at what happens as temperatures go up, crop yields for very important crops like wheat and corn decline. Some things may disappear completely. Like for a peach tree to set fruit, it has to chill. I tend to think of Georgia as being hot, but it gets pretty chilly down there in the winter, at least it has. Less so in recent years, and probably even less as time goes on. That means some of those peach trees may not have fruit. And this can become more and more of a problem with multiple crops over time. There's also problems with what nutritional value we get from these foods. Some people talk about, oh, carbon dioxide is going to be great for plants. It's going to be like a fertilizer. No, maybe, but in some ways. But we know, based on the research so far, that for many crops, it will lead to a decrease in protein and in essential minerals like iron and calcium. Now, it's just not just land-based crops that have this problem. It's also a serious problem for seafood. Many of us in Maryland enjoy lots of shellfish and fish from the Chesapeake Bay and other places. But in many parts of the world, it's not just something that they enjoy and find as a healthy food, it's something that's basic to their diet. People would be facing serious problems with malnutrition if they had a significant decrease in that. Those areas are really threatened by ocean warming and acidity that kills off many types of marine life, including the ones that we use for food. Now, ocean warming is pretty obvious. If everything's getting warm, oceans will get warmer too. And the oceans actually have absorbed a lot of heat, which we can be very thankful for. Climate change would be much worse if they hadn't been able to do that, although we may be getting to a point where they won't be able to do it as much. But absorbing that heat has consequences. Temperatures are going up, oxygen content's going down, making it harder and harder for many of those ocean species we depend on to survive. Also, there's an increase in acidity. As water absorbs carbon dioxide, it makes something called carbonic acid that increases the acidity of the water. And that also is a significant problem, something that we really noticed in the Chesapeake Bay. That increased acidity is a threat to oyster fishery. So oysters need to make shells. The more acidic the water is, it's harder to make a shell. Also a threat to oyster aquaculture. Blue crabs are probably also at risk, and it may affect other fish like striped bass. So it really could undermine the basis of our fishery, which is a huge industry in this area. Now, one of the impacts we don't think about as much is air quality. About 60% of our climate change problems come from the burning of fossil fuels. And those burning of fossil fuels also increase air pollution, and they cause all sorts of problems in terms of the health of one's lungs, one's heart. They cause problems for very vulnerable populations like pregnant women. The warmer it is, the more ground level ozone that you get. That's basically smog. It makes asthma much worse, it makes other health ailments worse. In areas where you've got oil and gas being produced, there's an even bigger problem with ozone smog that increases asthma and other respiratory related hospital admissions. Now, one thing that we're learning over the past few years is we've known for a long time that these things affect the health of our heart and lungs. But we're beginning to see that some of them, particularly the very small particles in the air, that they call PM2.5, particulates that are smaller than a human hair, go throughout the body. They affect the brain. They may be involved in Alzheimer's disease and other serious neurologic problems. They go across the placenta and may be affecting unborn children. They affect many, many parts of the body, and we're just beginning to scratch the surface of that. Now, the burning of fossil fuels isn't the only source of these things. Fire and smoke is also a big source. And with climate change, wildfires are a much bigger problem. They're not the only thing involved in wildfires, but they definitely, in the military sense, are a threat multiplier. Fire season in the American West is on an average 105 days longer than the 1970s. It used to be to try to define fire season. The firefighters worked extremely hard with that. And then they got some time to rest, regroup, get ready for the next year. That doesn't really happen much anymore. We're getting closer and closer to year-round fire season. Most of you are probably aware of what happened in Colorado in late December, those huge fires in Boulder. A few years ago, wildfires in Colorado in December were completely unheard of. They would have had snow by then, and wildfires would have been an impossibility. And the most devastating fires in this country have happened in just the last 10 years. And the problem is continuing to increase. That particulate matter that we get from wildfires is a huge problem. It's obvious close to the fire itself, but it can be seen, literally seen by how the sky looks hundreds of miles away. And it's not just how it looks, it's how it affects our lungs and how it affects the rest of our bodies. Now, maybe a little bit more benign impact are allergens, at least for most of us. I'm allergic to pollen, so I have a personal stake in this one. If you look back to 20 years ago, a pretty fair amount of pollen in the air during pollen season, but nothing like what it is now or what it will be. In the last decade, we've seen pollen season starting 3 days earlier. I think that's getting more and more so. That data is from 2014, and that's continuing to increase. And the amount of pollen is increasing significantly. And there's really no end in sight for that. Now, air pollution affects us all. We all breathe, but it affects some people more than others. Latinos and Blacks are particularly affected, particularly because of where they live. Now, there are sources like wildfires that will affect everyone in an area, but there are also sources that concentrate in a particular place. And those sources that can concentrate in particular places tend to be the worst in low-income communities and communities of color. And that causes some significant problems with difficulties like asthma. It's a definite problem in Maryland. In Maryland, 88% of us live in counties that don't meet the APA air quality standards. Now, this picture is from one particular day in 2019. I'd like to live over here in the green. Unfortunately, I don't. I live here in the orange, which is considerably worse. And although these orange splotches are maybe a little bit smaller, they definitely have a lot more people in them. And these yellow splotches are not so great either. There's a lot of research looking at asthma. And we know that asthma in Maryland is at a higher rate than in most other US states, but it's particularly bad in Baltimore. Looking at research from 2010, the asthma hospitalization rates in Baltimore, 2.3 times the average rate in Maryland, almost 3 times the US average, but it wasn't uniform across Baltimore. Those cases would concentrate in a few areas, and there was a very strong correlation with poverty, again, based on where was the pollution the worst. And we know that pollution is a huge factor in this. One of the ways that we know is that in 2009, the state imposed strict air pollution controls on 2 coal plants near Baltimore. And you can see a significant decrease in the asthma rates from that. That's great, but we can't say, we won, we're done. There are still significant problems that need to be met. Now, right now, I think probably everybody is thinking about COVID-19. It's a huge problem. And it's not primarily a climate change problem, but these things do affect COVID-19. We know that people who live in areas of high air pollution are significantly more likely to die of COVID-19. There are studies from the US and from other countries that show that clearly. And maybe one of the major reasons that people of color have had higher mortality rates from COVID-19 than the general population because of higher exposures to those high levels of pollution. We also know that dealing with climate change makes it harder to do some of the things that we need to do to protect ourselves from COVID-19. And think about heat waves. In a heat wave, there are a lot of people whose homes are just not cool enough to be safe, who really need help with that. So most communities open cooling centers. Well, cooling centers are usually a space with a whole lot of people packed into them who need to cool off. Absolutely the right thing to do to prevent heat-related illness, which very dangerous situation. However, think about trying to maintain social distance in that. Some people won't come because of their fear of COVID-19. Other people will come, and they're probably, even with masks, at somewhat increased risk. So you've got risks coming at you from both directions. We also know that some of the things that drive climate change contribute to pandemics. One of the things that contributes to climate change is as humans go out and develop more and more areas, cut down more forests, build more buildings, burn more fuel in these areas. That increases climate change. It also puts us closer and closer to wild animals we've never been in close contact with before. And we know that almost all of the microorganisms that have caused recent epidemics and pandemics came from animals. That's over 70% of them come from there. COVID-19 probably came from bats in China. Doesn't mean that wildlife is bad. It just means there's a problem when we are in much, much closer contact with it than we've been in the past. Our immune systems are not well acquainted with that. Makes the jump from animals to humans. It can become something that will cause an epidemic, or possibly, as with COVID-19, a pandemic. That's an issue that we'll have to deal with in years to come. Now, talking about all this, it's kind of depressing. I mean, it affects our physical health, it affects our communities, it also affects our mental health. It affects us in various ways, especially when you think about people who are affected by extreme weather events. They may have lost their families, they may have lost their homes, their lives may have been in danger, they may have lost pets, they may have lost their communities, all sorts of problems like that. So trauma and shock are serious problems. May damage their physical health, it may strain their relationships. And over time, you'll see problems like PTSD and people feeling like they've really lost some of who they are and control over their lives because they've lost so many things that are personally important to them. And that can cause a variety of mental health problems. Another problem we're seeing is what's called eco-anxiety. Many people, particularly teenagers and other young people, feel a huge amount of anxiety and worry about what's happening with the climate now and what's to come. What will their lives be like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? People asking questions like, should I even have children? And eco-anxiety is a growing problem. It impacts not just individuals, it impacts communities. We see problems with a loss of the sense of cohesion and continuity of really being a part of your community. That and other stressors can lead to more interpersonal violence like domestic violence and criminal behavior, and also lead to aggression between groups like political conflict and war. If you look at something like the revolution in Syria, that had many causes. Climate change is not the only cause, but the prolonged drought in Syria was certainly one of the triggers. Going back to the military metaphor, it's a threat multiplier. Now, one of the best things we can do to deal with the anxiety and to deal with climate change itself is to take action. And to know how to take action, we need to know what we're trying to take action against. What's driving all this? We can look at it in terms of sources of these greenhouse gas emissions that drive climate change. In the United States, the biggest is transportation. Close on its heels is the production of electricity. Not far beyond that is the industry, then our homes and businesses, and agriculture. Now I'm going to pause here before we go into what the solutions are so that you have a chance to ask questions about anything I've talked about so far.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. That was great. There's always something new to learn and to consider. So we are opening up to questions. If you like to ask a question, you can unmute your line or you can type your question in the chat. I don't know, Robert, if you see anything in the chat yet. I don't have that in front of me.
Nothing right now.
Okay, fantastic. So from my point of view Francis, there was so much that was presented. And of course, global warming and the pollution that is created by, burning of fossil fuels and other issues like in the transportation sector are the source, right? Or one of the sources of these many problems that are related to health. In your view, what is that I think would be one of the worst of these situations that you would want to see corrected? We talked about energy and transportation. Is there something else that I think would need to take the focus and the attention of our effort in the next several years?
Thank you. In Maryland, the two things that are kind of battling it out for being the biggest problem are transportation and buildings. And certainly electric power is a big piece of both of those. But if I could only focus on one thing, I would probably focus initially on transportation because it's such a huge source of greenhouse gases. It's also a huge source of other types of air pollution. If we can get our arms around that, that would make it much easier to do some of the other things.
Right, and we know that the solutions are available. So, really, some of the triggers that we expect are individual action, and we'll talk about what are those individual actions that we can all consider and take. But there's also community, right, initiatives that need to take place because the major impact will come from changes in the legislation, so from major transformation in the transportation sector, as you discussed as one of the first priorities, in the energy sector. What do we have? I know that you are a very good expert on what's going on in the legislation too. What is that we have that you see as a positive trend in that direction?
I think there are a lot of positive trends. If you look over the past year, the Biden administration has taken a number of actions on the administrative level. We passed the infrastructure bill, which has a lot of funding available for very important initiatives to address problems that are contributing to climate change. I still have some hopes for Build Back Better. We'll see what happens with that. There's been a lot of action on the state and local levels. I'm in Montgomery County, neighboring county, for those of you on Howard. Today, the county announced a number of spending plans for this year to improve public transportation and to address a number of other climate-related problems. There's also a tremendous amount going on in the state legislature. I spent a good portion of my time in the last week or so since the legislature went into session last Wednesday, dealing with what's going on with state legislation. There are lots of proposals that hopefully could help us really move ahead on climate change and help us really be a leader on that. Because I think Maryland has huge potential to be a leader in the United States. And recently, the United States hasn't been a leader in the world on this, but that's a position we could get back.
Yeah, I agree. Is there something that came from the chat? I see some. Oh no, this is the message from the library that I didn't have. So if there are no questions from the audience, and I hope that if you had a question, you could interject at any time. But let's move, Francis. Let's move to the action and choice corner, because I think you have some good suggestions that we can all consider and also discuss at the end of that section.
Okay, are you all seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so you can kind of put climate solutions in three buckets: resilience, mitigation, and restoration. With resilience, basically what we're doing is we are working to adapt to the problems that we have, to prepare for problems like extreme weather events, sea level rise, et cetera, and to protect people and communities as much as we can from the effects of that. And that's something that we really have to do. We're not at this point able to say, okay, we're going to prevent climate change. Climate change is already happening. We're already seeing serious effects from that. We can minimize those effects, but we have to live with what we've got. And resilience is very important for doing that. And resilience is really going to protect people, protect nature, and our communities in a number of ways. What I want to focus on a little bit more right now is action on mitigation. Now, mitigation sounds kind of weak, but mitigation is what we do to slow down climate change, to stop it, and to eventually reverse it. And that's going to take time. It's not going to be quick, but it's a little bit like trying to turn around an aircraft carrier. It's going to take time, but you can do it. We're going to look at several things that contribute to that. Clean energy, energy efficiency, particularly in transportation, and what we call natural solutions. And in each one of these areas, there are things we can do personally. There are also things we can do on the policy level, because we know that personal behavior is important. It can make a difference. And we should all do what we reasonably can. But if we all did everything we could, it still would not be enough. We need to come together as communities, as states, as nations, to really get a handle on this problem. So policy and action together is very important. Now, one of my favorite sources for this is Project Drawdown. This again is something that we could talk about for an hour or more, but Project Drawdown went into the scientific literature with working with experts around the world, with the 100 solutions to reverse global warming that were most likely to get us where we need to go. Now, it's not that you get to pick your one favorite solution, you do that and we're done. We need most, if not all of those solutions. But we don't have to do them, any one of us have to do all of them or do them all at one time. So let's look at what's in some of these solutions. One of the most obvious is clean energy. And clean energy really benefits health. Just switching from coal-fired electricity, which is what has been predominant in Maryland for years, to solar. If we did that across the country, we could prevent over 50,000 early deaths a year. That's a lot of people. It's not as hard as we think. I mean, when 10, 20 years ago, putting solar on your roof was difficult and expensive and something that you'd only do if you were really dedicated. Now it can be cost effective for most people, and there are some really simple ways of doing that. Now, not everyone can do it. I've had my house checked for solar 2 or 3 times. Each time they told me I have too many trees in my yard and my neighbor's yards. That's a good problem to have. So what I did was I subscribed to community solar. I get most of my electricity from a solar farm on top of an old landfill in Prince George's County. Great use for that land. And I know if I hadn't subscribed to it, it would have taken longer for that project to go. I was one of the last subscribers to let them actually get to the point where they could turn it on. It's great for people who can't put it on their roof, particularly for renters. That's something that's becoming more and more available in Maryland and across the country. Energy efficiency is also super important. Now, this is not about sitting in the dark and freezing. This is about whatever energy we use, getting the most bang for our buck, so that we're getting the most out of what we do. And it's something that can work in many, many different ways. It can help our pocketbooks, and it can also help our health in ways that we might not realize. Now, there are many different ways that things can become more energy efficient. Many of them relate to our homes. And making our homes more energy efficient can improve our health and our comfort. It can make our air quality better. It can allow us to make it easier to heat and cool our homes. So if we're faced with a heat wave or quite a cold spell, make it easier to keep our temperatures within our homes at safe and comfortable levels. So there are many things that we can do in that regard. And another good thing to talk about. Now, probably wherever you are in the United States, we could do better, but it varies a lot from across the country. This scorecard is in 2018. You can see that Maryland, among all the 50 states, was number 10. Not a bad ranking, but I would say even Massachusetts, which was number 1, has more that they can do. Another area for efficiency is transportation. There are lots of ways of doing that. Some have, really immediate health benefits. There are lots of good things about this, but particularly if you look at things like walking and biking, the increased physical activity with that can have significant improvements to our health. And also public transit. If you think about it, I don't know about you, but for me, I have never had a bus or a train come up to my house for me to get into. I have to get there somehow. Now you could drive, but many times it's actually more convenient to walk or to bike, at least part of the way. And the same thing on the other end. It's not likely to deliver you exactly to your office or exactly to the store or wherever else you want to go. So again, it increases activity. Another thing that we can do that's a major gain for our health as well as for the climate and the environment is to make some changes in our diets. Now, those changes don't have to be huge. Some people go, oh no, they're going to take away my hamburger. You have to take away your hamburger. There are many changes that we can make that can make a difference. And these show the effects of some of them. If you start with the average US diet, changing to what's called the Mediterranean diet, which is a very, very healthy and for most people, very palatable diet pattern that's typical of the traditional diets in places like Greece and Spain and Italy. Can do a lot for your health. It can also decrease your greenhouse gas emissions. We could just switch, I'm going to have pork or chicken instead of beef a third of the time. Or you want to go a little farther, just switch it out with beans instead of chicken. Or reduce your beef consumption in other ways. You might reduce your animal protein consumption overall. And protein is definitely a very important nutrient, but for the vast majority of Americans, cutting their animal protein consumption by half would not compromise their nutrition and might improve it in other ways. Going to being vegetarian, that's will do even more for your greenhouse gas emissions. If we had another bar here for vegans, but also go down a little bit more. So there are lots and lots of room between the typical US diet and never having another hamburger again. Now, if you eat what they refer to in Drawdown as a plant-rich diet, that can be very healthy for the planet, decrease your greenhouse gas emissions, free up more land, also can be very healthy for you. There are lots of controversies in nutrition, but it's hard to find a physician or a nutritionist who thinks it's bad for you to eat more fruits and vegetables. You don't have to go as far as being vegan unless you want to. That can be a great thing to do if that's what you want to do. These diets can also be delicious. And then this whole area of natural solutions. Now, what is a natural solution? Well, it turns out one of the big things that plants do for us, particularly trees, also seagrasses and many other types of plants, is that they take carbon out of the air and they build their own structures out of it through photosynthesis. And so the structure of the plant itself and also the soil around the plant holds lots and lots of carbon. That makes a huge, huge difference. And we know that making more use of those natural solutions by increasing our forested area, improving our agriculture, taking care of our grasslands and our coasts could have a huge, huge impact on the climate. And there's opportunities for that everywhere. Now, I think they're really kind of underestimating Maryland just a bit, perhaps because we're a relatively small space geographically, but the Chesapeake Bay has huge potential for restoring seagrasses, which make a big difference. And there are also other things that we can do, like planting trees. And these things can have all kinds of benefits in terms of climate mitigation, improving the air, improving our mental health and our physical health. Now we think of these typically in restoring forests and parks, but also improving agriculture, getting things closer to how they were prior to the Industrial Revolution. That doesn't mean we have to go back to how people were living in 1800. We can have many of the advantages that we have acquired since then in ways that are much kinder to our climate and our environment because of what we've learned in the last 200 and some years. But it's not just out in the country we can do those things. Urban greening and green infrastructure is very, very important, particularly planting trees in areas that need them. If you look at the typical city, the areas where people are more affluent, there's more money, there tend to be a lot more trees than places where people are just barely scratching by. Those places that have very few trees tend to be particularly hot. What you hear described as urban heat islands. If you look at a city and you compare it to the surrounding countryside, it can be a lot hotter, but it's not uniformly hotter in cities. Probably any place in the city is gonna be somewhat hotter than out in the country. But if you've got a place like this with lots of beautiful trees and lots of grass, it's gonna be cooler than places a mile or two away that are mostly pavement and very little vegetation. So if we restore that urban greening in these other areas, there's all kinds of benefits, helping us protect against floods and storms, improving our air, reducing the heat islands, many different things. But we know it also improves our mental health and well-being. There's a lot of research showing that being in nature, and it doesn't have to be out in the wilderness, it can just be a nice tree, has significant benefits for human health, particularly mental health. So I'd like to invite you all to be the change. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Right now, you're learning about climate change solutions. I hope you'll continue to do that. Find some changes you want to make in your own life. Talk with your family and friends. We tend to think that other people aren't as concerned as we are, but that probably is not true. Find some ways to be an advocate and join with other people. We are much stronger together than we are alone. And whatever else you do, please vote. We have important elections coming up, and elections definitely have consequences. We don't always get what we want when we vote, but I believe it's always worth doing. So I'd love to hear your questions and your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances, and thanks to everyone who is with us tonight. It's about 8 p.m. So we're gonna stay a few more minutes. I don't know if we have any questions. Anybody wants to open up their microphone? In the meantime, I'm going to take the sharing and review our final presentations here.
We have one question in the chat. And advice for younger people who want to become involved in advocacy. I think that's a great question. There are lots and lots of young people becoming involved in advocacy because they have the most at stake. Although climate change is happening now, if we don't get a handle on this, it's going to keep getting worse and worse. And that's the biggest risk for people who are in the early parts of their lives. And we see everything from middle school students up through young adults really becoming much more involved in this. Many people through groups in their school, whether it's a middle school or a high school. I'm working with 2 college student groups, one at the University of Maryland and one students across the state of Maryland. And a big part of their focus for this year is to pass what's called the Future Act. The Future Act would require Maryland state colleges and universities to fairly short time scale become carbon neutral, to have zero emissions, and also to develop curriculum to teach their students more about the climate and about what they can do and to take other actions. And that's just one example. But I think for all of us, but particularly for young people, finding one or more groups where you find a niche for yourself, because we all have skills, we all have knowledge and experience that we can, and talents we can bring to this. I had a friend who said, well, I can't, there's nothing I can bring to this. I'm just an artist. But wait. There's so many things you could do as an artist. Do you have any idea how many climate groups would snap you up in a minute for your skills as an artist? And whatever your skills and your interests are, there are people who want to work with you. There are groups that need you. And if you wanted to try to get something a little more specific, please let us know a little bit more about, where you are and what you're looking for.
Yeah, and in fact, we have seen how much the young generations have been engaged in the discussion, in the movements. Sunrise is an example, Greta Thunberg. So there are the young generation have really propelled a lot of the actions and the protests about taking, getting things moving. I think I wanted to, before we close, and please continue to ask questions as we close the program. But as I said at the beginning, this was the last of our event in a series that we had agreed upon with the Howard County Library. And so our program will be paused for a little bit, but we would like to get your feedback to see if you found that this was useful, you found that this was informative, you would like to hear more of what we can present. Please let us know. You'll probably receive a feedback, a survey from the library, and we would like to know what you liked about our program, what you didn't like, what would you like to see different. If there are subjects or speakers that you would like to see participating into future events of this program, and also we would like to hear from you about your actions. If you have been inspired by some of the actions that we have suggested, recommended, presented, or if you have done something on your own, if you are taking action or you're planning to take actions, any feedback that you would like to share with us. It's very important to us because we will be making decisions in the next few months about the continuation of this program. If we have the endorsement of you, which is our audience, and we would like to really have your feedback. And I think that if you also want to send specifically some questions to us, I am going to share my email in the chat. So please send me a message and we'll be happy to respond. Also, any feedback or suggestion you have on what we could do to engage more with the community, or what any other question you would like to have as consider, especially for future events. Wanted to thank you for participating to our event tonight, sharing part of your evening with us. Thanks, Dr. Stewart, for your presentation. Got a little hungry when we were talking about food choices. In fact, my wife and I did 1 year of, experimentation with being vegetarian. We couldn't give up fish, so we had fish, once a week or so, or twice a week. But we experimented with a lot of different recipe, and it is fun and it's good. Like you said, it's good for the environment. It's good for your own health. So I think something certainly we should all consider. It's a very small action we can all take. Oh, I see that Robert sent a link to the survey from the library. So we'll probably follow up also with an email to everybody that participated. You know, we thank you again, and we wish everybody a good evening, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.